How do you overcome the suffering of life? Is be a better person. That's how you do it. Well, that's hard. It takes responsibility. And I think, if you said to someone, you want to have a meaningful life? Everything you do matters. That's the definition of a meaningful life. But everything you do matters.
Jordan Peterson has undoubtedly been one of the most influential intellectuals of the past decade. His ability to captivate audiences with his eloquence and intellect is unquestionable. But how does a man go from this?
Your responsibility is to incarnate the spirit of the Logos. That's your responsibility. That's your role in life. And that is independent to some degree in whether or not you accept the idea of a transcendent and eternal reality. Now, I'm not making a case for that or against that. Those things are beyond human understanding. But we know what happens if people act poorly, if men act badly. We know what happens. We know that the world turns into something that's so close to hell that the difference is trivial. We know that. That's the story of the 20th century. So we should learn that lesson. And what that lesson is pick up the world on your shoulders and walk forward. Pick up the world with all of its trouble, with all of its suffering, with all of its evil, and move forward with it. And in bearing that burden, learn that you're the sort of creature that can bear that burden and therefore deserving of respect.
To this,
I like the unabashedly shameless capitalist ethos of the Daily Wire crew. They made me a great deal financially, one that offers me essentially unlimited creative freedom and opportunity, and still means that I can use YouTube, as I have been, to offer free content to a worldwide audience. I've always deemed myself an evil capitalist. I run my own businesses on a for-profit basis, with few exceptions, learning through hard experience that the discipline imposed by the necessity of pleasing an audience on an ongoing basis is a plus, not a minus.
in order to make sense of this, we need to go back and analyze Peterson's progress with a critical eye. Peterson entered the vernacular in 2018 when he became viral after having an argument with a trans activist in the campus of University of Toronto.
I want to go talk to Peterson. Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest?
You mean
The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest. Do you have any comment on that?
yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Then why are you?
Why were they here?
Well, how can I answer?
Are there views in alignment with yours?
At some point, you have to
That's a
realize,
foolish question. Look, if you want to know what my views are,
I've watched all of your videos. Yes.
including
Yes, I have.
then why would you ask such a question?
Because this is my interpretation of your videos.
apparently,
That's
I
not-
wanted.
All of the people who arranged the protest against you watched all of your videos.
Do you want to
I have
disavow?
150 videos on YouTube.
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Okay.
Do
I
you
have
want to disavow the
150.
support?
Could you let me talk to her for a moment?
Don't call me that, please.
So, I have 150 lectures on YouTube. There's 500 hours of my views.
Do you really
If
think that
want to
you're
find
worth
out
all
what
of
they
that
were-
time?
So look, I will answer your question, okay? I've studied Nazism for a very long time. It's been 4 decades, and I understand it very well. And I can tell you that there's some awful people lurking in the corners, and they're ready to come out. And if the radical left keeps pushing the way
That
it's
sounds very
pushing,
much like a
they're
threat.
going to come.
That sounds very much like a threat. That sounds very much like a threat. Would you like to disavow the physical violence? Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence?
Yeah.
So you wish that didn't happen, and you want to, and I'm going to post this online that you would like people to not to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I would
I'm
like
a
there
person
to
of
be
color.
no
Listen,
violence.
I'm a person of color, and I felt very accommodating here.
person of
I
color
felt like my
too.
voice. Thank you very much.
Muslim, and I feel like this guy passed.
The discussion was quite heated, and Peterson managed to draw a lot of attention because of his composure and clarity. After that incident, he got constantly invited to interviews, and many considered him as the most important intellectual of our time. But throughout the years, he has undergone a significant transformation, and I wanted to delve into this transformation. In order to understand what is happening, we need to go way back, before Peterson was a popular figure.
Now, if you have any belief system at all, you do this. So let's say you're an advocate of left-wing politics. You take a pro-environmental stance or an anti-corporate stance, which is a relatively common thing to do among undergraduates. What do you do when you hold that belief system? You view the world as it lays itself out, and you explain the manner in which it manifests itself in terms of the axioms of that belief system. And you may note that you can do it, right? You can tell a credible story about why the world is the way it is by adopting, say, an anti-corporate perspective. Because there are all sorts of terrible things about the world that are a consequence, say, of corporate maneuvering. And Peter Pan, Pan means everything, eh? Pan, like pantheistic. And Peter Pan is a child who won't grow up. Now he's magical. Well, okay, fine. Children live in a magical world, right? They're rife with possibility. He's magical. He doesn't want to grow up. So he lives in Neverland with the Lost Boys. Neverland doesn't really exist, and the Lost Boys are obviously boys who haven't managed to establish some mode of being. And he's in constant battle with Captain Hook. And Captain Hook's a tyrant, right? A pirate, a manifestation of the negative archetype of social order. And Captain Hook is always fighting Peter Pan because Peter Pan represents childhood and vulnerability, and he doesn't want to be vulnerable. So they're locked in this sort of eternal battle. And lots of people, I think more commonly men, but not necessarily, get caught in this Peter Pan problem.
We can clearly see that Peterson, even as a young academic, had fire in his heart. He was very articulate and he was constantly trying to discover ways to deeply analyze the human condition. In his first book, Maps of Meaning, he attempts to formulate a theory for how people construct meaning in a way that is compatible with a modern scientific understanding of how the brain functions. I read the book and it was quite the read. This is how Peterson won me over. I was desperately looking for modern intellectuals to look up to, and he ticked all the boxes. Some of his interviews from 2018 are mesmerizing, to say the least.
I don't know what happens to a person if they bring themselves completely into alignment. I've had intimations of what that might mean. We don't understand the world very well. We don't understand how the world could be mastered if it was mastered completely. We don't know how an individual might be able to manage that. We don't know what transformations that might make possible.
People think, especially when they're nihilistic and they become destructive, that the universe is sort of, it's an unfair and arbitrary place, and it's basically bent on their random destruction while they suffer. It's something like that. Yeah, right. Okay, what do you do under those circumstances? That's the question. Well, one potential answer is twist the thing so that you can maybe get what you hypothetically want out of it. The other is rely on your perceptions and your capacity for accurate representation, communicate that, and take your chances. It's like, who's right? Well, that's the battle between good and evil. Who's right? It's a continual battle.
Because I'd also say that if you haven't done that kind of shadow work, if you haven't made friends with your anger, if you haven't integrated it, you're actually more dangerous.
Yes, definitely.
Because then things will happen that it will come out in a way that you don't expect.
Right, it comes out disintegrated. So it comes out as an autonomous spirit, right, under no one's control. And that's like a burst of rage, let's say. You either have that or it has you. Those are the options. And you don't become safe by being castrated, right? That's not the right move forward. You can actually see a change in people's faces when that part of them is integrated, when I would say the rage circuit is integrated, because their faces harden. Like they no longer look like wide-eyed children, that they're no longer someone to whom things only happen. They're someone who makes things happen. And there isn't much difference between being dangerous and being indomitable, right? They're the same thing looked at from two different perspectives.
It also became apparent to me that he was a deeply religious person, and as an agnostic myself, I wanted to understand why he was so adamant about religion.
If you don't want to move into a metaphysical space, I'm not arguing for the existence of God. I'm arguing that the ethic that drives our culture is predicated on the idea of God, and that you can't just take that idea away and expect the thing to remain intact mid-air without any foundational support.
Religion for him leads to the development of the self. We live in an age where people struggle to find meaning, and the idea of self-development appeals to most of us.
There's this idea in Jungian psychology called the circumambulation, and Jung had this idea that you had a potential future self, which would be in potential everything that you could be, and that it manifests itself moment to moment in your present life by making you interested in things. And the things that you're interested in are the things that would guide you along the path that would lead you to maximal development. Now, it sounds like a metaphysical idea or a mystical idea even, but it's not. It's not. It's a really profoundly biological idea. The idea is something like, well, you're set up so that you're automatically interested in those things that would fully expand you as a well-adapted creature.
And that's how the famous clean up your room idea came into prominence.
Clean up your room. That's a good start. Organize your local landscape. Schedule your time. Start taking control of yourself. See if you can stop saying things you know to be lies.
Peterson was also quite fond of myths and religions. He wanted to understand the essence of the stories we've been told and how they shape our societies.
So Isis, queen of the underworld, gives birth to Horus, and Horus grows up outside the kingdom. Why? In the underworld. Because that's what human beings do. You're alienated from your culture. Always. Why? It's old and dead and corrupt. And so that leaves you growing up in chaos, what would you call, alienated from your fundamental culture. That's the story of adolescence. Horus grows up. He can see. That's what differentiates him from Osiris. That's why he's a falcon. He goes and has a fight with Seth. And now the difference between Osiris and Horus is that Horus does not underestimate Seth. He knows exactly what he's up against. He goes and has a terrible battle with him, trying to get his kingdom back. Something else that's echoed in the Lion King story. And while Horus and Osiris or Seth are fighting, Seth tears out one of his eyes. Now why? Because Seth is the embodiment of destruction and malevolence, and no matter how conscious you are, if you encounter that, even voluntarily, the probability that it's going to damage your consciousness is extraordinarily high. That's why people don't do it. So the eye is torn out, but Seth is defeated, and Horus banishes him to the nether regions of the kingdom. You can't kill him. Why? Because the malevolent, destructive force that threatens states never dies. It's always there. You can only remove it temporarily. Now Horus is king, Pharaoh, king, God. He's got his eye, and so you think, well, he's going to just pop that back in his head, and then he's going to be able to lead. He's going to be able to take his place at the uppermost pantheon of gods properly. But that isn't what he does. He takes his eye and he goes back to the underworld, just like Pinocchio going into the depths to rescue Geppetto. And down there is the spirit of Osiris, who's extant as a kind of half-dead ghost. And he gives Osiris his eye. Now Osiris can see. So what does that mean? You go down into the chaotic, when threatened by malevolence, even to the point of damage to your consciousness. You go down into the chaos and you find the dead spirit of your tradition and you give it vision. And so, provided with vision, Osiris regenerates, and then Osiris and Horus go back up to the world, linked together and rule jointly. And the Egyptians believed that the Pharaoh, who had an immortal spirit, was the embodiment of the conjunction of Horus and Osiris. And that's what gave him sovereignty. And so you think about how brilliant that is. The Egyptians are trying to puzzle out who should lead, who should be Pharaoh, and what do you have to be if you're going to be Pharaoh in order for things to work. You have to be awake to malevolence and chaos, and you have to embody your tradition. I mean, you know, in the story of the Tower of Babel, human beings make this massive building that's supposed to reach up to the heavens so that it'll take the place of God. Well, that's the earliest warning we have of
the danger of making things so big that you confuse them with God. And God gets irritated and comes down and makes everybody speak different languages and scatters them. It's like, well, that's what happens when you try to make something a totality, is that it starts to fragment inside and disintegrates into catastrophe. And so it's almost as if we have to maintain this articulated space inside the dream, inside the custom, something like that, because otherwise it doesn't work. And I think that's the same as having respect for the fact that we have bodies. You know, we're not just abstract creatures that follow rules. We're not that at all. We only follow certain rules. We won't follow the other ones, and our societies will crumble. And so, we just don't know enough to articulate the entire landscape of behavior with articulated rules. Not at all. We can't do it. It's beyond us.
Eventually, he became very famous and started giving speeches all over the world and amassed a huge and hardcore following. The mainstream media wanted to target him for his controversial views, but this didn't always end up well.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on. So and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and... I'm just trying to work that out. I mean...
Ha, gotcha.
You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head. Yeah, it took a while.
It did, yeah.
It took a while.
Other great intellectuals showed interest in him, and he had some very intense debates with people like Sam Harris and Slavoj Žižek.
You designate your, under quotation marks, I'm not characterizing here, enemy, or what you are fighting against, as sometimes you call it postmodern neo-Marxism. I know what you mean. All this, from political correctness to these excesses of whatever spirit of envy and so on and so on. Do you think they are really, where did you find this data? I don't know them. I would ask you here, give me some names or whatever. Where are the Marxists here? I don't know any. Who is a Marxist here? Well, show me any big names of political correctness. Well, I think they fear like a good vampire fears garlic. This is why they are already, the one who is not a Marxist, but at least approaches economic topic, Bernie Sanders, he is already under attack as white male and all that stuff and so on. My problem would be with this one. What you describe as postmodern neo-Marxism, where is really the Marxist element in it? They are for equality. Sorry, where? They are for equality at these cultural struggles, proper names, how do we call each other? Do you see in them, in political correctness and so on, any genuine will to change society? I don't see. I think it's a hyper-moralization, which is a silent admission of a defeat. That's my problem. Why do you call... Give me... No, it's not a rhetorical question for politely saying you are an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. It's simply, I would like to know, because you, and I like this often, when you attack somebody, you said aggressively, and what should? Read more, tell me, whom? So I'm asking you now, not read more, I don't advise you, but who are? Give me some names and so on, and who are these postmodern, egalitarian, neo-Marxist, and where do you see any kind even of Marxism? I see in it mostly an impotent, an utterly impotent moralization.
To take Christianity as an example, what do you believe about the origin of this sacred book, the Bible, Old and New Testament? Do you believe that just maybe it has a status unlike any other book? or is it simply old writing of human beings just like ourselves?
I think it's both.
Okay, so but so what does that mean? That you're saying that there's somebody who's taking dictation that is unlike any other dictation. So Homer, though creative,
Sam,
or Shakespeare, though creative, was doing something else.
Sources of inspiration.
Okay, but but everyone's been inspired.
If you talk to creative people,
yes,
they often describe themselves as something approximating a conduit through which higher wisdom is pouring.
Again, you're dodging. Shakespeare could say that, and any writer can say that. Ultimately,
yes.
Right?
And it's also the case that we would rank order those writers, which is why you pointed to Shakespeare, in terms of the generalizable validity of their revelations.
Sure.
And so, well, look, so you run into the same issue. You criticize the Bible, and look, fair enough. But you're also evading a very important issue, which is how do you quantitatively rank the contributions of literature without assuming that there's a hierarchy of revelation?
There's a hierarchy of wisdom. Sure, there's a hierarchy of human wisdom. I will grant you that every day of the week. But But we're talking about primates like ourselves having conversations, and this is the most important game we can play. I mean, this is the best game in town, and it has always been so. But people are imagining, and it includes, as you said at the outset, what I would call spiritual experience. And spiritual experience admits of a fact-based discussion about the nature of human consciousness. And
why do you allow that as an exception? Because
it's not an exception; it's part of the data set. So it's possible to have
so this is spiritual experience without the possibility of concretized revelation.
No.
So it's a formless spirituality that you're advocating.
No. You can have. I'm not even discounting the possibility that there are invisible entities out there in the universe far smarter than ourselves who we could possibly be in dialogue with. I mean, there are many strange ideas that we could defend to one or another degree. There are people walking around speculating that we might be living in a computer simulation, that all of this is being run on some hard drive of the future, or some alien supercomputer. Now, that you can actually, I mean, Nick Bostrom at Oxford gives a very cogent argument in defense of that thesis. Right? Now you can deal with that on its merits. I'm not saying the universe isn't stranger than we suppose or even can suppose, but one thing we know is that when you read the Bible, you can turn every page of that book and you will not find evidence of omniscience. You will not find anything in there that someone as smart as Shakespeare, or actually a little bit dumber, could have written.
Everyone thought that he was invincible and that there was no end to his ascent. But then he collapsed. Peterson got addicted to benzos, and this had a detrimental effect on his health.
It appeared in some sense that the reason I was ill was because I was taking benzodiazepines. But that isn't why. I was ill, and then I took them, and very low dose, and I took that for a long time, and it helped whatever was wrong with me, and it looks like it was an allergy, or maybe multiple allergies. And then that stopped working, and so I took a little bit more for about a month, and that made it way worse. And so then I cut back a lot, and then things really got out of hand. And so
he had to disappear from the spotlight for some time and get hospitalized in a facility in Serbia in order to overcome his addiction.
Hi, everyone. As some of you may know, but others will not, it's been a long while since I put up any new content on this YouTube channel. I've been suffering from impaired health, severely impaired health, as a consequence of benzodiazepine use for anxiety, or more accurately, from a combination of using that medication and then ceasing its use once I realized it was dangerous. That's put me in and out of hospitals for much of the last year, in Connecticut, in the United States, in Toronto, in Canada, in Moscow, in Russia, and in Belgrade, Serbia, as my family searched for specialists who could aid me in the severe post-use withdrawal and neurological damage-related consequences of both the benzodiazepine use and its cessation.
However, he managed to recover from it, and he did an impressive comeback a few years ago. But there was something we couldn't really see behind the curtain.
One person saw it though, and he opened my eyes to something very important.
Peterson, first he was very bright, extraordinarily articulate, and in some ways a compelling speaker. So he's an attractive figure in some ways. When I read him, I sense a lot of suppressed rage in him. In fact, I think his voice is choking with rage a lot of the time. It's interesting because he talks about rage, that you have to deal with it. I don't think he understands just how angry he is. And if you look at his websites, the comments are full of rage by his young acolytes. Now that's an energetic thing. That it's his energy that draws people as much as what he actually teaches.
Dr. Peterson, despite being a highly intellectual person, couldn't control his rage. He's a psychologist, a person with a lot of patience and empathy. But the toxicity of the people that were against him, especially from the left, got under his skin. He got bitter and was overwhelmed with rage. And that was something that conservatives tried to capitalize on. At some point, Peterson decided to join Daily Wire Plus, a medium owned by conservative Ben Shapiro.
The plan is to build a multimedia empire offering services on the philosophical, educational, journalistic, and entertainment front, including movies, TV shows, and media for children, and an empire that will not fall prey to the woke authoritarianism that has become increasingly mandatory in so many places.
Woke authoritarianism is, as he says, what he's fighting against. This decision feels strange to me, but there are two ways to interpret it. Either that he was deeply hurt by the toxicity of the left and had to choose sides, or that he was always a hardcore conservative and he was just hiding behind the facade of intellectualism. I personally don't have a problem with someone identifying as a conservative, but if you decide to do so, be a conscious conservative. I think when Dr. Peterson decided to pick sides, he did so because he became resentful. And that's the case with a lot of intellectuals nowadays. When they say something that the left does not agree with, they get criticized harshly and sometimes they even get cancelled. I understand where this aggressive rhetoric comes from, but it really alienates some great intellectuals. Jordan Peterson was a great asset and had to be treated as such. When he decides to pick a side, he will eventually need to follow the agenda of that side. That's not how we progress as a society. Intellectuals are assets that allow us to follow reason and fight propaganda. They are archetypes that allow us to navigate through the unknown by showing us a way and helping us recalibrate our moral compass. If they succumb to special interests for whatever reason, this hinders progress and perpetuates the current problems that we all face. As I said, maybe he was always like that, but maybe he wasn't. The jury is still out there.